The crystal chandelier above the long oak table in the community clubhouse cast dancing shadows across the white linen as I sat there, hands folded in my lap, listening to the familiar sound of HOA laughter. I'd heard it 1,000 times before, that particular blend of self-importance and insecurity that echoed through every leadership appreciation potluck. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the laughter had teeth. You know what I love about these dinners? Karen Whitaker was saying, her wine glass tilted at a dangerous angle as she gestured like she owned the room, which, in her mind, she did, getting to meet the better halves who keep our star volunteers grounded. Her eyes swept the table before landing on me with laser precision. Speaking of which, Elena, it must be so nice just relaxing at home while your husband Jake here climbs the HOA ladder. The comment hung in the air like the smell of cheap Chardonnay and entitlement. I felt my spine straighten, but I kept my face neutral. Around the table, the other board wives shifted uncomfortably. Patricia Wells, the treasurer, let out a nervous giggle. Michael Torres, the only decent one on the finance committee, was cutting his chicken with surgical precision, pretending not to hear. I mean, Karen continued, emboldened by the silence. Some of us have to work for our success, organizing fundraisers, writing violation notices, enforcing the sacred 2-inch grass rule, but others get to live the dream, right? Must be exhausting choosing which Netflix show to binge while the rest of us keep Willowbrook Estates from turning into a trailer park. More laughter rippled. I watched Jake from the corner of my eye, waiting for him to say something, anything. Instead, he wore that uncomfortable smile he always put on when he wanted to fit in with the cool HOA crowd. Karen, you're terrible, Patricia chimed in. But honestly, Elena, I do envy you sometimes. No violation letters. No stress. Just the luxury of being supported. She raised her glass in a mock toast. Here's to marrying well. The laughter grew louder. I felt heat creeping up my neck, but I forced myself to take a slow sip of water. Michael was staring at his plate like it contained the secrets of the universe. Of course he knew. He had to sign off on every financial report. Come on, ladies, Karen finally spoke up, her tone amused rather than corrective. Let's not make our guest of honor uncomfortable. She winked at me. Though I have to admit, Elena, you got it figured out. Why volunteer when you can let someone else handle the heavy lifting of running this place? That's when Karen delivered the killing blow. Seriously, though, she leaned forward with predatory glee. It must be nice being useless while your husband makes the community beautiful. I mean, what do you even do all day? Yoga? Pinterest boards? Must be exhausting. The table erupted. Jake actually threw his head back and laughed. A real, genuine laugh that cut through me like a blade. Patricia was practically cackling. Even the other board members were chuckling behind their napkins. The sound bounced off the mahogany walls and the framed HOA Code of Conduct plaques, creating an echo chamber of my humiliation. I sat perfectly still, watching their faces. Karen looked triumphant, like she had just won the annual Most Violations Issued trophy again. Jake was wiping tears from his eyes, still chuckling as he reached for more wine. Patricia was nudging the woman next to her, sharing the joke. Something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. I thought about the late nights 3 years ago when I had coded until my eyes burned, building the software that saved this entire neighborhood from bankruptcy. I thought about the city fines we were drowning in, $250,000 for neglected common areas because Karen's precious flower beds have been replaced by weeds. I thought about the acquisition papers sitting in my home safe, the ones that clearly stated my 67% ownership of Willowbrook Estates, HOA Corporation. I set down my water glass with deliberate care and turned to face Karen directly. The laughter was still echoing, but I could feel Michael's eyes on me. He had stopped eating entirely. Funny you should mention that. Karen, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a knife through silk. The laughter began to die down as people register my tone. Does it feel strange that this useless woman owns 67% of your HOA? The silence that followed was absolute. Karen's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Patricia's mouth fell open in a perfect O of shock. Jake looked like someone had just told him his entire life was a lie. But it was Karen's face I focused on, the color draining from her cheeks as the implications hit her. Her fork clattered against her plate, unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. "I'm sorry." "What?" she whispered, all her earlier confidence gone. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin on the table with the same careful precision I had used for everything else that evening. "Thank you for dinner, Karen. It's been illuminating." I could feel their eyes following me as I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Behind me, I heard the scrape of chairs and urgent whispers trying to make sense of what had just happened. My hands were shaking as I reached for the door handle, but I didn't let it show. Not until I was safely in my car in the parking lot with the engine running did I finally allow myself to breathe. 3 years earlier, Willowbrook Estates had been a completely different place. My alarm would go off at 5:30 every morning because my mind was always racing with new ways to fix problems most residents didn't even know existed yet. I would pad barefoot across the hardwood floors of my quiet cul-de-sac home, make coffee that was probably too strong, and settle in front of my computer setup that took up half the dining room. Elite Community Systems was my baby. I had started it in my garage 4 years before that, working 18-hour days and living off ramen and determination. By the time this story really begins, we had grown to 47 properties under management and were being courted by big property management giants. The AI software we had developed wasn't just innovative, it was revolutionary. It could predict maintenance issues, optimize dues collection, automate violation tracking, and keep neighborhoods from collapsing under city fines. I remember the morning everything changed. I was reviewing code when my assistant knocked. "There's a Karen Whitaker here to see you. She says she's the president of Willowbrook, HOA. I had heard of Willowbrook, of course, a mid-sized gated community that had been around for 15 years. Respectable, but nothing special. Certainly not the kind of place that usually ended up in my office. Karen walked in wearing an expensive blazer that couldn't quite hide the desperation in her eyes. She was the kind of woman who commanded attention. Tall, perfectly highlighted hair, pearls that screamed, "I'm in charge." But I had learned to read people, and Karen Whitaker was drowning. "MS. Martinez," she said, extending her hand with a smile that was just a little too bright. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice." We sat in my office overlooking the neighborhood, and she launched into her pitch. Willowbrook was looking to modernize, to embrace the future of community governance. They had heard about my software and were interested in a partnership. As she talked, I pulled up their financial reports on my tablet. What I saw made me understand why she was really here. Willowbrook HOA was hemorrhaging money. Their reserve fund was almost gone after years of petty lawsuits and city fines. Their processes were inefficient. They had maybe 6 months before the city would seize common areas for unpaid violations. "MS. Whitaker," I interrupted gently. "Let's skip the sales pitch. Your HOA is in trouble." Her smile faltered. "I wouldn't say trouble exactly. We're just looking to expand our capabilities." I turned my tablet around so she could see the numbers. "You've lost 30% of your reserve fund in the last 18 months. Revenue from dues is down 42%. The city just slapped you with another $85,000 fine for landscaping violations, your own backyard. I believe." I leaned back. "You're not here for a partnership. You're here because you need a miracle." The mask slipped. Karen's shoulders sagged. You're right. We're dying slowly. I've got 230 families counting on me, and I'm running out of options. I respected the honesty. In the HOA world, admitting weakness was career suicide. What if I told you there was another option? Not a partnership, something bigger. Her eyebrows rose. I'm listening. I stood and walked to the window. Elite Community Systems has 3 offers on the table. Big management firms want to buy us for millions. I don't want to sell to them. The innovation dies. Everything that made it special gets absorbed. But what if instead I bought into something smaller? Something with history, with established residents, with a president who actually cares. Karen stared at me like I had spoken in a foreign language. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Elite Community Systems acquires Willowbrook HOA. We bring the technology, the innovation, the growth potential. You bring the residents, the relationships, the operational infrastructure. Together we build something neither of us could create alone. The silence stretched as Karen processed what I was proposing. I could see the wheels turning, calculating risks versus the chance to save her precious presidency. That would make you, she started, the majority owner. Yes, but you would remain president. Your board keeps their positions. Your residents get better service than they've ever had. And instead of watching Willowbrook slowly die under fines and lawsuits, you get to be part of building something extraordinary. Karen was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the perfectly mowed lawns she loved to police. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. What would you want in return? The negotiations took place in the same clubhouse conference room that smelled like coffee and desperation. Karen had assembled her entire board, 5 lawyers in identical Navy suits who looked like they had stepped out of an HOA handbook. I brought my attorney, Catherine, who had handled more community takeovers than anyone in the state. Let me make sure I understand, said Karen's lead counsel. MS. Martinez wants to acquire Willowbrook HOA, but wants MS. Whitaker to remain president and maintain operational control. That's correct, Catherine replied, sliding a folder across the table. But let's be clear about the structure. We're creating something entirely new. I watched Karen's face as Catherine outlined the deal. Elite Community Systems would merge with the HOA, but the resulting corporation would be structured so that I retained 67% ownership, while Karen kept her title and the board kept their roles. 67%, Karen said slowly, reading from the documents. You want control. I want protection, I corrected. This technology we're bringing is worth more than your entire reserve fund. I need to ensure it's used correctly. The lawyers spent hours hammering out details, dues structures, violation enforcement, decision-making hierarchies, non-compete clauses for board members. I found myself studying Karen during the tedious parts. She was asking good questions, protecting her little empire, making sure the transition looked smooth for her ego. There's one more thing, Karen said near the end. My husband, no. Wait. Your husband, Jake, has been instrumental in maintaining resident relations. I'd like to see him get a board seat as part of this transition. I felt a small smile tug at my mouth. Jake and I have been married for 8 months. Though we kept it quiet since he was already involved in the HOA, Karen didn't know about our relationship. And Jake had no idea I was the one behind the takeover. What kind of seat? I asked neutrally. Vice President of Community Relations. He has the skills to bridge old residents and new systems. Catherine glanced at me, one eyebrow raised. She knew about Jake. That seems reasonable, I said, as long as he's qualified. The final clause was the one I had thought about for weeks. I want the ownership structure to remain confidential. Publicly, Karen remains the face of the HOA. Internal documents reflect the truth, but external communications, newsletters, violation letters, Karen is president and primary spokesperson. Karen's eyebrows rose. You want to stay in the background? I want to focus on the work, I replied. You're good with people. Karen, you understand the politics, the gossip, the petty power plays. I understand technology and real efficiency. Why not let each of us do what we do best? We structured it, so I retained final approval on major decisions, budget, rule changes, any future expansions, while day-to-day enforcement stayed under Karen's control. No layoffs of staff. No gutting the existing board immediately. Everyone got a chance to adapt. As we wrapped up, Karen stood and extended her hand. Elena, I think this could be the beginning of something remarkable. I shook it, feeling the weight of what we were about to undertake. I hope you're right. Karen, for both our sakes. What I didn't tell her was that I was already planning how to break the news to Jake that his wife had just become the secret owner of the HOA he was so proud to serve. The first sign of trouble came 6 weeks after the acquisition closed. I was working late in my home office, tucked away on the 3rd floor, so no one would suspect, when I heard laughter from the backyard barbecue the board was hosting. Jake's voice carried clearly. I'm telling you, the timing couldn't have been better. Elena's been talking about wanting to step back anyway. Focus on home stuff. Now I can actually provide for us properly in this community. I froze. Through the window, I could see Karen leaning against the grill, hanging on every word. That must be such a relief, she said. It's sweet that she had her little tech hobby. But let's be honest, how sustainable was that really going to be? My little tech hobby? The software that had just saved their HOA from bankruptcy was being dismissed as a hobby. Exactly, Jake replied. And now, with this vice president seat, I can focus on building something real, something stable for the neighborhood. I closed my laptop quietly and gathered my things. As I walked past the patio, Karen caught my eye and gave me a bright, condescending smile and a little wave like I was a child who had wandered into adult conversation. That night at dinner, Jake was glowing. You should have seen Karen's face when she told me about the board seat, he said, cutting into his steak. Vice President, Elena. Can you believe it? It's wonderful, I said, forcing a smile. You deserve it. The pattern continued over the following months. At block parties, I watched Jake bask in congratulations while I stood quietly beside him, introduced as Jake's wife or the supportive one at home. The irony that I was being introduced at events for my own HOA as someone's accessory wasn't lost on me. The comments started small. Patricia mentioning how lucky I was to have found someone so community-minded. Karen making jokes about how I could retire early thanks to Jake's success. Each incident small enough to ignore individually, but together they formed a pattern. I was disappearing in my own neighborhood. The worst part was watching Jake change. The man I married was thoughtful, always asking about my work. But as his status grew, he needed the validation of being seen as the successful one. Elena's taking a break from the corporate world. I heard him tell a neighbor one evening at a cookout. She's exploring her options, figuring out what she wants to do next. I stood frozen at the grill, listening to him rewrite my story. In his version, I wasn't the one who had saved the entire community. I was figuring things out while he climbed the HOA ladder. While I returned with drinks, the neighbor gave me a sympathetic smile. Jake was just telling us you're between jobs. That must be stressful. Something like that. I managed. That night, I tried to bring it up. Jake, when people ask about my work, you don't have to make it sound like I'm unemployed. He looked genuinely confused. I'm not saying you're unemployed. I'm just you're not really working right now. Are you? You're taking time to figure out your next move. I'm working, I said carefully. I'm consulting on the community integration. Right. But that's not really a job, is it? It's more like helping out. Helping out with my own software in my own HOA. I realized then that Jake genuinely believed his own narrative. The fact that I was still reviewing every major decision, still guiding the AI that kept violation notices accurate and dues flowing. None of that registered as real work because it wasn't visible to his HOA friends. I started working later, staying in my office after most residents had gone to bed. It was easier than watching Jake accept praise for saving the community while I played the supportive wife who had nothing better to do than attend HOA functions and smile politely when Karen handed out another ridiculous fine. The invitation to the annual leadership recognition dinner arrived on expensive cardstock with gold lettering. Celebrating excellence in community governance and growth, it read. I stared at it, knowing the growth being celebrated was largely mine, achieved through systems I had designed from my quiet home office. You're coming, right? Jake asked that evening. Karen specifically wants all senior board members and their spouses there. Besides, it'll be fun, good food, good wine, and I get to show off my beautiful wife. Show off, like I was a decorative lawn ornament rather than the person who actually owned the lawn. The day of the dinner, I almost called in sick. I stood in front of my closet staring at the blue dress Jake liked, the one that made me look appropriately supportive but not threatening. And then I put on, applied makeup with battle precision, and drove to the clubhouse with growing dread. The private dining room was exactly as expected, all dark wood and crystal, designed to make important people feel important. I recognized every face. Karen holding court at the head, Patricia laughing too loudly, Jake beaming, Michael giving me that quiet look of sympathy across the table. The conversation started innocuously enough. Praise for the new quarterly numbers. Excellent. Thanks to my AI that automated everything. Recognition for streamlined processes that cut costs 30%. Processes I had designed. I sat quietly sipping wine while my achievements were credited to strong leadership and dedicated volunteers. It's amazing what good leadership can accomplish, Karen was saying, raising her glass toward herself. When you have a clear vision and the right team, there's no limit. Absolutely, Patricia added. And it doesn't hurt to have supportive spouses who understand the demands of building something great. She glanced meaningfully at me. That's when the conversation took its familiar turn. Karen launched into her routine about balancing important community work with supporting a partner's success. Of course, some of us are fortunate enough not to have to worry about that balance, she said. I was finding mine. Must be nice to focus entirely on the relationship without the stress of professional obligations. I felt Jake shift beside me, ready to say something that would make everything worse. Something about how I was exploring options or taking time for myself. Elena's been incredibly supportive, he said. She understands that sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good of the neighborhood. Sacrifices. As if staying silent while they took credit for my work was noble instead of strategic. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what they thought I was, a decorative accessory. When I returned, the conversation had moved to vacation plans. Safe topics. I settled back in, resigned to enduring the evening. I had no idea Karen was just getting started. 2 hours later, after several glasses of wine, Karen decided to go for the kill. She had been building to it all evening, that predatory gleam in her eye. You know what I love about these dinners, she said, gesturing broadly. Wine sloshing. Getting to meet the better halves who keep our star volunteers grounded. Here it comes. Speaking of which, Elena, she continued in that syrupy tone. It must be so nice just relaxing at home while Jake climbs the HOA ladder. Some of us have to work for our success, but others get to live the dream. Must be exhausting choosing which yoga class to attend. The laughter was nails on a chalkboard. Patricia cackled. Jake grinned. Karen, you're terrible, Patricia managed. But honestly, Elena, I envy you. No deadlines, no stress, just the luxury of being supported. Here's to marrying well. The laughter grew louder. I felt like I was watching from outside my body, seeing myself in the blue dress while these people, whose salaries and fines ultimately came from my systems, mock me for being useless. Karen pressed on. Seriously, though, it must be nice being useless while your husband makes the community beautiful. I mean, what do you even do all day? The table erupted. Jake threw his head back and laughed. Patricia was in tears. Even Karen was chuckling behind her napkin. The echo chamber of humiliation filled the room. But it was Jake's laugh that broke something inside me. This was the man I had married. The one who knew how hard I had worked to build the system that saved his precious HOA, and he was laughing at the suggestion that I was useless. I sat perfectly still, watching their faces. Karen looked triumphant. Jake was wiping tears, still chuckling. Something crystallized in my chest, cold, sharp, and clear. I thought about the patents under my name generating millions in saved fines. I thought about the algorithms that had revolutionized their operation. I thought about the acquisition papers in my safe stating my 67% ownership. I thought about the 3 years I had watched them take credit while treating me like an ornament. Michael caught my eye. He had stopped eating and was watching with anticipation. I set down my water glass and turned to face Karen. Funny you should mention that. Karen, I said, voice cutting through the noise. Does it feel strange that this useless woman owns 67% of your HOA? The silence was vacuum sealed. Karen's glass stayed suspended. Patricia's face went white. Jake looked confused, then betrayed. Elena, he whispered. What are you talking about? I reached in my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the folder I had prepared months ago. Michael, I said steadily, would you like to confirm the ownership structure for everyone? Michael cleared his throat. Elena Martinez owns 67% of Willowbrook Estates, HOA Corporation, through the acquisition of Elite Community Systems 3 years ago. The structure was kept confidential at her request. Elite Community Systems, Karen repeated hollowly. You're the founder. I am, I said simply. The company that saved Willowbrook from bankruptcy. The software that increased your reserve fund by 300%. The algorithms that streamlined operations and made you look competent again. I looked around the table, meeting every eye. The little tech hobby Karen mentioned earlier. Karen's hand was shaking. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, I said, voice gaining strength. Because I chose to stay in the background. I chose to let you maintain your presidency while I focused on the work. I chose privacy over recognition. I turned to Jake, who was staring like I was a stranger. I chose to support my husband's board advancement, even when it meant watching him take credit for working in a neighborhood I own. Patricia croaked. The board seat, Jake's promotion, was my suggestion, I confirmed. I thought he was qualified. I thought he deserved the opportunity to grow within my HOA. Karen was shaking her head like she was waking from a nightmare. The confidentiality agreements, the private ownership. You've been here the whole time, I said. Right down the street from where you've been handing out violation notices funded by my systems, my innovations. I stood, napkin placed precisely. I've been listening to you all take credit for my work for 3 years. Jake, I got my answer tonight about who you really are when you thought I couldn't affect your status. I walked around the table toward the exit, but stopped at Karen's chair. Effective immediately, I'll be taking a more active role in operations. We'll schedule a board meeting to discuss leadership changes. Karen, I'll expect your resignation on my desk by Friday. Patricia, we'll be reviewing harassment policies regarding hostile environments. I reached the door and turned back one final time. Jake was still staring, face a mask of shock. Jake, I said quietly, your board seat will be vacated by Monday. Not because you're fired, but because I don't think you'll be comfortable working for the wife you just spent the evening laughing at. I walked out into the parking lot, heels clicking like freedom. Behind me, the explosion of voices began, but I didn't look back. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. The next morning, the neighborhood woke up to new emails from Elena Martinez, majority owner. The 2-inch grass rule was repealed. Christmas lights could stay up until February. No more fines for bird feeders. Karen's house received the first official warning for her own overgrown rose bushes, the same one she had fined 3 neighbors for last month. And somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear the sound of entitled laughter turning into panicked silence. The Karen who thought she ruled the roost had just been reminded that in every HOA story, the quiet resident sitting in the corner might just be the one holding the deed. Justice, it turns out, tastes a lot like perfectly manicured revenge.